So one thing that I wanted to be sure to ask you about, in the bio that you sent me, you say that you enjoy thinking deeply about coffee. and
Oh boy.
I bring this up because as artists, well, first of all, as a coffee lover, I bring this up, but also because as artists, I feel like we're always looking at the world around us and distilling it into various, I guess, philosophical thoughts. So, do you care to elaborate on how you do this with coffee, maybe, for example?
Oh, I'd love to. Okay, so my journey with coffee started when I was in high school, and my brother, for Christmas one year, had bought me a French press. And up until this point, I was like a Starbucks caramel frappuccino, extra caramel kind of guy. I'm paying for that now, but I had no idea that coffee could be something different than that. And so I had this French press, and I freaking hated it for so long. I was like, this tastes disgusting. I still have to put all this creamer and this milk in it. Anyways, that seed years later eventually sort of germinated and blossomed into this sort of rabbit hole I fell into in undergrad of espresso. And I remember I bought my first espresso machine. It was not a nice one, but I began to learn about how to extract coffee, how to taste espresso, how to foam milk for latte art. I had a buddy in Chicago who was a former barista who was kind of like telling me about all these numbers and all these ratios you can use for coffee, and not just espresso, but for black coffee. And I bought myself a Chemex, and I bought myself all these things. And it was all self-taught though. Everything was self-taught. I just like read books, I watched videos, and I ended up opening the first of 2 illegal coffee shops at a college. In undergrad, it was called Espresso Espressivo, and it happened in our lobby of our school of music. In grad school, in grad school, the shop was called Coffee Tuesday, except for it met on Wednesdays and sometimes Thursdays, which is confusing, but it was called Coffee Tuesday. Anyways, and so then when I moved to New York, I knew that I loved coffee, and I knew that I couldn't afford to live in New York. Even though I had a nice scholarship from the college and like a TA and all those things, I was like, we are still way not covering what I need to live here. So let me go work in coffee. I was like, I feel like that kind of fits like a cliche of like an artist who works in a coffee shop. And so I began working at this shop called Darling Coffee, which is up in North Manhattan. And I worked there for 3 or 4 months. And then I moved to a shop called Bell's Coffee, which was down in Soho. And that coffee shop was crazy because at Bell's, it was like right across the street from this sort of really bougie hotel where like all these like celebrities would sort of go. And so my entire time working there, I had regulars like Scarlett Johansson or like André 3000 who would come in and like talk about their process. Yeah, he signed my like Italians record. Anyways, and I worked there for a while. And then my last job in New York, which was the most sort of important coffee job, was I became a barista educator at a shop called Irving Farm, which has a couple different locations. There's like 6 locations in Manhattan. But I was a barista educator there, and I worked with our like wholesale clients on like how to taste coffee, how to brew it. I was like training our baristas and like extraction and latte art. At this point, I was a fairly common fixture at like all the festivals, and I would run booths and I would do trainings, and I was just like super into like the most specialty version of coffee that you can imagine. I was doing all the math and I was tasting it just constantly all the time. And at home, I had my full coffee bar set up and all these things. And then after New York, when I came back to Georgia, I just kind of had my home bar set up for a while. And then when I first moved to Charlotte, before I began teaching at the college, I was like, okay, well, I want to find something to do here, like before I kind of started teaching full time. And by complete accident, I happened to meet this guy named Tony Santoro, who owns this coffee shop here called Enderley Coffee. And he was just so happening to need a new roaster. And it was the one part of coffee I hadn't done. So, I had done the barista, I had done like the manager, I had done the barista educator, I had done the wholesale stuff, but I hadn't like roasted coffee yet. And so I was like, I can learn that. And so I began roasting coffee for Enderley for about half a year. And then I got the job at the college and sort of had to phase out. Although Tony and I still have a really good relationship, and I do music at his cafe, and like I love those people dearly. But to kind of go back to your question, all of that just sort of goes to show that coffee is something that for me shows a level of intention that we don't get in a lot of things, right? And it's as someone who brews coffee at home, I control all these parameters, or at least I try to. I can control how many grams of beans, how finely, how coarsely I grind them, how hot the water is, how I want to kind of like disperse them in whatever brewing device I'm doing, how much I want to agitate the coffee, all these different things to kind of yield this liquid in this cup. But even with all of that control, you're always surprised. You can't control everything in coffee. And it's something that's so beautiful and powerful about it as a hobby and as a career. There's a great book called God in a Cup about how people were kind of chasing this idea of like a spiritual interaction with coffee, like through what's called the God shot, which, you know, like you pull an espresso and you might have this just like perfect like combination of like things that makes this just, you know, like special drink. Anyways, I don't know if like I fully buy that, but it just it shows a level of intention, and it shows that I care about what I'm brewing for myself or my wife, or if like I was working at a shop, what I brew for a customer. They come into me and I don't know what their night was before. I don't know how their morning is going, but they trust me to make them a cup of coffee. This kind of mundane thing that I get to now make sacred through this interaction between me and my coffee equipment. And then once I make this coffee, me and this customer. And it's just the most beautiful thing. And it's there are so many parallels like between my music composition career and my work in coffee, and about my continued love for coffee. I mean, I think about coffee a lot. If I wasn't working in music, it would be in coffee for sure. And it's still sort of like a retirement plan. Maybe later, like I might kind of get back into it. But like this summer, for example, like I was thinking about, you know, what through the summer. And of course there's, you know, always like the occasional opportunity to go teach at a festival somewhere, like do private teaching or whatever. But I wrote to Tony and I was like, hey, Tony, is it cool if I just like go behind the bar at Enderley and like, you know, I don't know, make some drinks for people like for a few weeks? And he was like, you want to come back to retail? And I was like, yeah, I do. Because that kind of like interaction with people and the coffee and all of that is just so life-giving for me. And it's a different kind of life-giving than what I get through like my musical interactions, that I was like, yeah, I want to come work at the cafe for like 6 weeks. And he was like, okay, I'll come pull some shots. And it was just like the best. So I care about coffee a lot. And I think about it definitely more than most. And, you know, I'll tell you like what I tell everyone, like the best coffee is the coffee you enjoy. Right. Like, so whatever you decide to put in your cup, like if it's Starbucks or if it's like the kind of coffee I brew or like anything in between, that's great. Like, and you should only drink what you love. But I think with coffee, it's something that we have every day. And there are ways to just like continually search for what better might be. And it just helps to keep me curious, helps to keep me humble, helps keep me honest, helps keep me creative, both as a person and as an artist. And also just tastes really freaking good. So I love coffee, and I could talk about coffee a lot, but I won't do it more here. But
No, I love it. Yeah, I got to a point where I was probably drinking too much coffee a few years ago, and I kind of have people don't usually. I'll just say I mask it really well, but I kind of have like low grade anxiety at all times. And so the coffee certainly wasn't helping. And I was drinking like a pot a day, which is way too much. And, you know, I decided one day I would just quit cold turkey, which actually, you know, the withdrawal thing that people talk about, caffeine withdrawal, like that didn't really happen to me, but I missed it so much. And now I'm back drinking it with more moderation. We were talking a little bit before we started recording of how we will both be in Ireland soon in a week or so. And I went last year and didn't drink any coffee. And this year I'm very excited to go back to, you know, another country, other cities. I mean, that's one of my favorite things is
there's great coffee in Dublin.
I just like, I'm just so looking forward to like coffee in the morning in Europe. Like it's, you know.
Yeah, I definitely had to. I agree with you. I had to make a conscious choice to kind of like cut back on my coffee consumption, because as someone who is working in it it's a bit like working in wine or like any of like the alcoholic beverage industries. I want to taste it all the time, but like you can't do that, right? And so there's a reason why people who work in wine, like they spit it out all the time, right? And in coffee, I kind of had to learn to do that. I was like, I just can't drink this, but then, and so now I drink probably 1 cup a day. I still might just brew some drinks for fun, like I try and keep my like latte art skills up. And so I might just sort of like pull a shot, like and pour a cappuccino or something and look at it and like get a cool picture and then just dump it or something, which is admittedly wasteful. And I hate saying that here, but I can't consume it all. I will also say that there are some really great decaffeinated coffees now, especially if you can find ones that are decaffeinated through the Swiss water process. That is the way to go.
Yeah, I encountered some great options and not so great options during my caffeine hiatus.
There are definitely some not great options. Well, so what coffee have you been enjoying recently? What's been like your go-to cup?
I can't really say like, I have like my daily utilitarian, like beans from Costco. I think it's like the Comfort Coffee brand, just what we can buy in bulk. That is what we like the best, but it's summertime. It's blazing hot like all the time now here in Cincinnati and everywhere else I find myself for whatever reason. So I've been, as of like a couple weeks, I've been really enjoying, like if I find myself at a coffee shop, I'll get an espresso lemonade.
Ooh.
Which I was telling a buddy of mine who loves coffee the other day. I was like, I've started to drink these and I know it sounds like disgusting, but it's so good. Just that little bit of tart from the lemonade and the sweetness or an espresso soda is really nice. Like just kind of like a fizzy, so that has ended up being my go-to recently. Yeah. And I've really been enjoying them and I've been evangelizing for it.
I'm a sucker for the iced Americano only because when I was in New York, my second job, the manager of that cafe, his ritual was just kind of, he'd come in and as he was dialing in the espresso, which like dialing in is like a process of where every morning like the coffee changes, like it grows, it evolves, it like has different dreams. And so like we take this coffee and we have to sort of redial it in to figure out how to make the espresso pool like the most delicious version of itself for that day. He would always just have an iced Americano as he was doing that. And so I guess I was just like super impressionable or something, but I just sort of, after like I left that cafe, I began always having to have like an iced Americano if like I was ever dialing an espresso. It's very strange. And then I'll give a shout out here in Charlotte. We have sort of 3 kind of main sort of specialty coffee roasters. So there's Enderley Coffee, where I used to work and I still play music there sometimes. And they have Night Swim Coffee, which has a few locations around. And then if you want probably the most specialty of the 3 is a shop called Hex Coffee, which is owned by this guy named Tanner Morita, who's also a musician. Their slogan is unashamedly bright, I think is their slogan. But their coffee is awesome too. Hex Coffee. So you go check it out. Yeah. Enderley Coffee, Night Swim, and Hex here in Charlotte. Some great stuff.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Micromaker by Loose Leaf Transmissions. We hope you enjoyed this brief glimpse into the inner workings of the creative life. If this resonated with you, be sure to check out the full conversation on Music Maker with Tyler Kline, a podcast exploring craft and process, philosophy and inspiration, and the honest, often messy parts of being an artist, creative uncertainty, purpose and identity, and resilience. You can find Music Maker wherever you get your podcasts or by visiting musicmakerpodcast.com.